I love that song. I love that idea that what we find underneath the tree after all the things that we long for, that what we find perhaps is ourself, our name written on the earth. This idea of Christmas, I, I want to leave you with a couple of quick thoughts. And I want to thank Elizabeth for sharing her story because the wonderful thing about stories, I don't know if it happened to you while you were just sitting there listening to these seeing these beautiful images, these stories probably started coming to your mind as well. And I started to remember some wonderful hunting stories. But I want to just get this out here just for you to think about throughout all this thing. We think of ourselves, I think, in the church, and I'm speaking universally, in terms of the general church, the United Methodist Church, the larger church, the church universal. Christians, I think, in general, have always thought of ourselves as an Easter people. It's a common sort of thing we say. We are an Easter people. We are people who celebrate resurrection. The notion, no matter what happens, love conquers all. And I think that's important. I don't want to dismiss that that's an important part of who we are. I think, though, that this is really the most important thing to remember, to be a part of, this idea of Christmas. And not simply because it's cute and it's wonderful and our culture has taken over, or the Western world has taken over with our general sort of worldview, which is more or less a capitalistic kind of worldview, a material kind of worldview, that everything is kind of like either or, we have or we don't have, and then we get caught up, Christmas gets caught up in that narrative as opposed to what the story, the sacred story, is really saying. This idea that everything is holy. This idea that incarnation is happening, which to me is perhaps the most profound and maybe even the most difficult to put into practice personally. Because ultimately what that means is we're all part of God. And God's part of all of us. It's all sacred. Even the people we don't like, even that other political party, whoever that other political party may be for you, even those folks over there that we just as soon not talk to. All of us are a part of this incarnational reality, God with us. Richard Rohr is one of my favorite new authors I've been reading, and one of the things that Richard Rohr talks about when he's talking about Christmas is he has this interesting image. He says, you go to a Christmas tree, and you may do this at your house. We do it at our house a lot. There's not one single ornament on our tree that doesn't have a story. I mean, even the year that was kind of lean on the fact that we didn't buy an ornament that year to symbolize something, even on those years, which we've had a few, what we adorn the tree with those years are the little decorations that came on Christmas presents. And so they're hanging on the tree because they remind us of sometimes the stories don't always seem to be there. But if you look at all the ornaments, there's always little stories. And Richard Rohr talks about how it's fascinating if you start to think about it, if you'll just suspend time for a moment and you look at the story of that ornament or what that story, or what it reminds you of, suddenly we've transcended time. Suddenly we're back in almost this kairos kind of reality where we're in the past, where we're experiencing that moment as now. And a profound thing happens. Just for a moment, we become present to something. And then we might move away from it and we might get back into our busy day. To me, the idea of presence is perhaps the most challenging thing that we face, but it's the biggest gift of all at Christmas. Not the presents under the tree, the gift of simply being present. Yesterday, I was pretty upset. My son Tim, his wife Emily, our granddaughter Molly, our 3.5-year-old granddaughter, they're in Germany. My mother's not doing well. I started counting up some things yesterday. I don't know, I woke up in a bad mood or something. But my day was looking kind of bleak, and I was looking around at the Christmas we decorated. We were going to have the band party over at our house. We have plumbing leaks now in our house. My younger son, who I love and is amazing, and invited me to go to a concert this weekend in Houston, and I almost did. But I decided I better be here. He's remodeling the bathroom, which means it is completely... How many of you saw fried green tomatoes? Do you remember when the woman found herself and began tearing apart the house and thought, this is really fun, so I'll tear apart? Well, that's kind of what's happened to our house. It started in the bathroom, but now the hallway is now a part of the reconstruction. And so all of this chaos, and we've got the decorations, and nothing's going to happen. You're all invited to our house this week. Nothing's happening this holiday season because of the problems and the stuff, and the kids are gone. And I was feeling kind of bad, and Linda says, why don't we just go for a walk? The sun's out, it's beautiful. It's like 65 degrees, right? And I just didn't want to do it. And I said, I'm going to go run some errands. And so I went and ran some errands, picked up some prescription, picked up some contacts. And I was kind of taking my time going back to pick up a few groceries. And I came back out to the car, and all of a sudden, the sun was gone. The sun was gone. Wind was whipping around. Sky was covered in clouds. It had dropped 15 degrees. And so I was like, awesome, this will be great. I can just get a fire, and I'll just sit in the living room, and we'll just kind of wait out the evening. And when I got home, Linda had her tennis shoes on. She was ready. Now she had a huge coat on, and she said, let's go walking. And I said, what? And she said, we're going to the park. I said, what? We're going to the park. She said, we're going to go walking in the park. And, of course, it was 20-mile-an-hour winds, and it was 45, and then it was 40 degrees. And by the time we got to the park, it was 40 with a chill factor of about, 30. And we're walking around. And it's kind of funny because you can see people that went to the park about an hour earlier for photographs, and they were all in sleeveless outfits. And they're just running around like this, saying, hurry, take the picture. And we're kind of enjoying this whole thing when people are scattering for their cars. And this Japanese family come up to us, and they said, you have to come with us. We saw something amazing. And we're like, what? And the woman, she said, it was like a woman and a husband and an older daughter. And they said, we saw an owl. And so we said, okay, fine. And we went across the street into that wooded area of the Botanic Gardens. It's very wooded and kind of rough looking. And we were walking through there, but they kept looking back going, shh. And they kept saying, look up. And so we're walking through this trail, and we're just staring and kind of losing our balance when the guy said, stop. And he said, listen. And we could hear it off in the distance just a little bit. Hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo. And he started to point over there, and it was like, okay, there's an owl there. And then out of nowhere, an owl came from the other side and flew across. Right over our heads, about 10 feet. It was stunning. And then he smiled and looked at us. He like, do you see what I saw? Do you see the magic I found? And now I gave it to you. And so we sat for a little bit longer, walked around, went around to the other side and looked where we thought we heard the sound. And then we were right behind it on the other side, and sure enough, the owl came from the other direction this time. And then 2 owls flew off into the distance. And we just started walking for the rest of the afternoon in the garden until it got almost dark and came back home. My uncle used to take me and my brother hunting, which is what you reminded me of. And I'll never forget Christmases with Uncle Mac, because Uncle Mac had lots of hunting stories to tell. He loved to tell these amazing hunting stories. And so I expected that the time we would go hunting would be this amazing time. We would get a deer, and it would have a 12-point rack, and we would come home victors with our heroic tales. But the funniest thing about my uncle, when he took us hunting, he took us to Ozona, which is one of the most difficult areas to try to hunt, for the first thing. And secondly, we didn't have deer blinds. I said, Uncle Mac, I thought this was like a turkey shoot. We just climb up into the deer blind and we shoot whatever comes to eat. And he said, no. He says, no. He says, we got to go find them. And so that morning, after when we first arrived, we got our rifles, and we went out and we started walking. And after about 2 hours of walking, we'd think we'd hear something over somewhere. And Uncle Mac would say, did you see anything? And we'd say, well, no. And he would say, is it possible you're looking too hard? And we'd say, no. We're supposed to be looking. And he would tell us things like that because he would say, sometimes if you look too directly at something, you miss it. But when you learn to look around something, you might see something you didn't expect. We spent another hour or so out walking around when we saw a little white tail about 100 yards away dodge off into the draw, the little cliffs in the rocks. And Uncle Mac smiled and said, it's a good day. And we turned around, we went back to the trailer. And I said, Uncle Mac, we didn't shoot anything. And he said, well, I didn't think we were going to. I said, well, what was the point of that? He said, the point is just to see. The point is just to be present and to see. And he said, you got to see. Incarnation is not about something that's fixed. It's not about something that gets repaired at Christmas time. It's not about something, I don't even know why I have my notes here. I haven't even used them yet. It's not about something that we hope will happen like a good Hallmark movie. We get caught up in that worldview that everything is supposed to come together, that everything is supposed to be happy, that it's supposed to have a happy ending. We have this idea, even in our mythical notions of the Nativity, that there's a God out there who brings a baby in here and changes the world. But if we're not going to hold to that, then we have to make sense out of what does incarnation mean. If it's not the happy ending, if it's not everything gets fixed. I think incarnation reminds us everything is holy. Everything is waiting to be discovered. The challenge is that we're in the midst of feeling sorry, or we're in the midst of feeling sad, or we're in the midst of experiencing losses which we have, which this time can be such a painful time for a lot of folks because of any number of reasons. The challenge is, how are we present to Christmas? What does it mean to be present? Something that Elizabeth said in our gathering this morning struck me as kind of interesting that I hadn't thought of. Because I think the one thing we do at Christmas time, but we do all year long, is we practice trying to be focused and present to the moment. Like our Japanese friends that introduced us to owls yesterday afternoon. Or my uncle who would take us hunting and just say it's all about just seeing. But at other times, this practice becomes difficult because we live with dualistic minds that say it's supposed to be this way. It's not supposed to be that way. And Elizabeth shared an interesting idea, which I've always known too. I just forgot it. If you want to change the world, if you want to change your world, then sometimes we have to change the stories we tell. Sometimes we have to change the stories we tell ourselves. We have to give ourselves permission. And I think the easiest way to do that is by remembering the gifts that are with us in every moment. If it's the smallest thing of staying focused on being with somebody at that moment and just paying attention, if it's making the conscious choice to go ahead and go for a walk and pay attention to what's going on around us, if it's making that conscious choice not to tell myself this story over and over and over, but to tell a different story, that's how we begin to transform. That's how we begin to rebirth something here and now. I'm going to invite the band to come on up now as they finish with this beautiful song called Blessed. And this song, they sang this song a few months back. And when I heard the song again, I thought, well, that's really what our lives are all about at Christmas time. That's really what our lives are about as incarnational people, is this recognizing the holy in all moments and realizing at Christmas time, that's what we get to open for one another.